Stephen Squibbs presents this month's board certification tip.
Welcome to another board cert tip of the month. And with me, Andrew Redder from Sesame's Black.
Hey, Eddie,
Andrew,
how are you
with
today?
us? Congratulations, my friend, on being one of the 6 attorneys who passed the board cert test in 2022. Yay!
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So only 6 people passed and 3 of them were named Andrew. So I think that tells you a name change may be in order. What did you think of this massive epic exam, Andrew?
It was a huge undertaking. One piece of advice that I would give just at the very outset for anybody that's going to be taking the exam would be to start studying early. It's the whole process can seem and feel very overwhelming. There's a lot of material, a lot of potential issues that could be covered. So, a lot of family and friends asked me once I got my results, how are you feeling? What are you feeling? And the one word that I just kept coming back to was relief. It just felt so good to be done with the process and done with the test, and knowing that I won't have to sit for that exam again.
Yeah, when I passed it, it was like the last exam I ever had to take. So and true to my word. But it is hard, and studying takes on a different form for everybody. It's a massive amount of information you got to plug into your brain. They give you the core and subcore, and really everything within that is tested. So how did you go about learning all of that data and getting it in your head?
So I think that the first place that I started, and what I would recommend to folks taking the exam, is to start with the Florida Law Weeklies from the year that you're going to take the test, and just start going back into prior years. But I think that recent Florida appellate family law decisions are the best place to start, just because those are issues where new case law is coming out or the law may be changing, but also because as you're reviewing that case law, it's a good refresher as to prior decisions that have come out. So, given, as you said, just the sheer volume of material that's on the exam, I personally think the best place to start is with Florida Law Weekly opinions, and of course the red books from Cert Review. Definitely give those a plug.
And do you read Florida Law Weekly every week, or did you just tackle the material?
So I try to read them every single week, especially in, I would say, the 6 to 9 months before the exam started. I became much more consistent with reading them each and every Friday. But I think it's important to not only read the new cases that are coming out, but then to go back and catch up on the prior, probably at least 2 to 3 years of Florida Law Weeklies that have come out.
Besides the red books that you mentioned and the weeklies, what other resources would you use?
Well, I think it's important to kind of focus on subjects and topics that you've either heard from people that have taken the test that are heavily tested, such as there's going to be certain things in child support or military pensions, or just topics that we don't necessarily deal with every single day in our practice, but they're issues out there. They're covered at Cert Review. We see them from time to time in the Florida Law Weekly summaries, and it just seems like there are certain topics that they're always going to find a way to test on. They may change the questions, they're going to change the fact patterns, they may do it the opposite question that they had done 2 or 3 years before, but there's just some major subjects that are very likely going to be on the exam, and I think it's important to focus on those. Whereas, there's going to be smaller issues that, yes, it's in the red book. Yes, it's part of our practice, but are they really going to use valuable testing space on an issue that never really comes up or may come up in our practice once every decade or more? So, I think that trying to figure out what the most heavily tested subjects and topics are, and really focusing on those.
I know board cert is really important to the firm you belong to. How were your partners able to help you through this process?
Well, as you said, it was definitely important to my partners, and from the moment I joined the firm 7 years ago, they definitely set out the expectation that I would become board certified at some point. So that's helped me insofar as I was tried to be cognizant over the last couple years to, as I'm in my practice, to continue to learn this stuff as you go along. I practice 100% family law, so I'm doing this day in and day out anyway. And my partners were extremely helpful, just because Alex, he's gone through this process before. He's board certified. Caroline, she is board certified. And they were able to provide just some general testing tips, as well as just to share some thoughts on the process and areas that Caroline and Alex thought may be covered on the exam. And just like I said, just some general testing strategies. But they definitely put an expectation early on that board certification was important, and something that I should work to achieve.
If you're doing something for a living, why wouldn't you want to be the best at it?
Absolutely.
Seems pretty simple.
Absolutely.
So did you have like a study buddy, or did you team up with anyone?
So I did not have a study buddy. About a year or two ago, I was in a study group and spent a couple years in a study group that's since dissolved. But the materials that I mainly focused on were, and we've already spoken about two of them, the Florida Law Weekly Summaries was number one, the Red Books from Cert Review, and then also just reviewing the Florida family law rules, as well as the main statutes that we encounter fairly common: 6130, 6108, the equitable distribution statute, 61075. I think that those are like the main. If you were somebody that you only had time to look at a few different categories of materials, I would say definitely the Florida Law Weekly Summaries, the Red Books, as well as the rules and the main statutes that we encounter.
And did you keep track of how much time you spent studying? I
stopped keeping track at some point, just because it was so much time, and I just felt so overwhelmed with not only studying for the exam, young children at home, also maintaining a busy law practice, that even the thought of I'm spending time to enter time that's non-billable, I just stopped tracking it at some point. But it's an immense amount of hours that goes into it. I would suggest, coming up with a very specific study schedule and calendar that you stick to. Everybody has our own strengths and weaknesses, whether you're somebody that, works better in the morning, works better at night. We all have different schedules and calendars. Me personally, I'm sharpest in the morning. So one thing that I tried to do was get to my office even earlier in the morning and spend the first 2 to 3 hours of every workday just studying for board cert. And I probably did that for a few months before the exam. That would then allow me to have, a fairly standard workday after that, shortened by a couple hours, but still get in a full workday. And then oftentimes after the kids went down to sleep, there'd be another hour and a half, 2 hours, during the week. And then also trying to find some time on the weekend. But it is definitely a test that takes a significant amount of commitment, and if you can't put in the time, energy, and effort to study and really prepare, then you may just be wasting time taking it, and you may want to reconsider when you're able to devote more time. Because personally, I do not think, even for practitioners that practice family law, day in and day out, I think that this exam is so difficult that if you do not study and devote a significant time and energy in preparing for it, I think that there's a very good chance that you're not going to pass the exam, even if you practice family law on a daily basis. It's just a very technical, very specific exam.
And you have to know everything at once. Literally, you have to know everything at once. The exam has gotten a lot of criticism because the passage rate is so low, and this year 6 out of 20 something passed, which would be about a quarter. Now that you are board certified, do you think the process of vetting these attorneys is fair?
I can't really speak to either that process of what goes on, between submitting that application and then the 6, 7, 8, 9 months that goes by between you even figuring out whether you're going to be able to sit for the exam or not. I know that we submit references for a peer review process and submit judicial reviews. What goes into that, or how that looks, or what they're looking for, or what qualifies you or disqualifies you is not something that I really know. I'd be curious to kind of see the number that applied to take the exam versus, actually became eligible to sit and take it, to see if there was a big drop off there or not.
I don't think they release that.
Yeah, I don't know if they're ever going to give us that information or not, but so I can't really speak to whether the process is fair in terms of vetting, and even the passage rate. Just simply saying a percentage that 10% passed or 25% passed or 50% passed. Without knowing more about the time and energy that those folks put in, without knowing more about how the exam is put together, what they're looking for. I don't know that I'm really in a good position to say that the passage rate is too high or too low.
And now that you have passed, is there any tips that you could give our listeners that may be thinking about or about to take this exam?
Start early. Do not wait. Do not delay. Do not think that this is something that you can study for 30 or 60 days and pass the exam. I know from talking with people that took the exam in prior years, as well as somebody that took it and passed with me in this cycle. They spent months preparing for the exam and devoting a significant amount of time into it. It is a tremendous professional accomplishment, but it's certainly not easy, and a lot of work and time and energy and sacrifice goes into it. So, just the single biggest piece of advice that I would give to anybody considering taking the exam is to start early and to start preparing as soon as possible. That's for the exam, but I do actually have one more tip too about the application, and that's the actual board certification application is like 45 to 50 pages long. And I would say that it probably took me 2 to 3 full business days to complete my application. And that's even with, over the last couple of years, tracking my cases and trying to get, ready for the application process. One thing that I did was really track my trials, and I was very on top of the 7, 8, 9 cases, the trial cases that, you have to have.
The B1s.
I'm sorry?
The B1s on the app.
Correct. Those B1s are ones that I really did not. I spent less time on the front end considering, but took a lot more time in preparing the exam, preparing the application. Was these B cases that didn't go to trial, but they still want to see substantial involvement. That was something that I did not do a good job tracking on the front end. And it necessitated hours worth of work going back through some of these cases that are now 3 or 4 years old to figure out, what discovery did I do in that case? Did I take a deposition? Did I send additional interrogatories? Was there a request for production that was more than just the standard request? So in the application process is something that I think people also should not underestimate. If you see that deadline, and I don't know what it is in 2022, but last year the deadline was August 31st, 2021. That was something that, like I said, took me days to complete. And I would definitely start that application as soon as possible, and at least 2 to 3 weeks before the deadline.
Well, keep in mind, every 5 years you recertify and have to provide the same information. So keep your app handy. Well, Andrew, thank you so much for spending time with us today and giving us your insight, and congratulations on this epic achievement. You're in a very special group of, not too many people do this within their first decade of practicing. So kudos to you. That just shows you're a superstar, and we look forward to see what you do with it.
Thank you, Eddie. I appreciate that very much.
Andrew, it was a pleasure talking to you.